Okay, for the first case, with fewer than 6 degrees of freedom, a simple example is the SCARA robot that we have already seen. The SCARA robot has 4 degrees of freedom. There is a rotation around the first local z-axis, then there is a rotation here, then there is a translation. This joint is a prismatic joint, so there is a translation, and then we have a fourth degree of freedom, which is going to be the rotation around the end effector. So this is a 4 degree of freedom robot. Once again, the first degree of freedom is this joint around the local z-axis z0. Then there is another revolute joint, a rotation around z1. Then there is a prismatic joint with the translation along the local z-axis. This is the third degree of freedom, and this is the fourth degree of freedom, the end effector, which has a axis of rotation, the local z-axis z2 in this case. The SCARA robot is useful. It can pick things up, but if you think about it, its end effector is always pointing down, right? It can rotate around this vertical axis, and it can reach there some finite places where it can reach any given position, but there is no way for this robot to make the end effector point somewhere else. For example, it cannot point towards us coming out of the board, for example. Okay, it can only point down because it's a 4 degree of freedom robot, and there is no workspace where arbitrary position, arbitrary pose can be achieved. Okay, we can look at a video of this robot. Okay, to make the end effector point out anywhere other than along its vertical axis, there is no workspace where this robot can achieve any position and orientation of the end effector. This is not the SCARA robot, this is the SCARA robot. Okay, there is some workspace where it can achieve any position of the end effector. Any position of the end effector. It can actually achieve any position in multiple ways. You can imagine elbow towards us and elbow away from us. Okay, let me stop here. Okay, we can imagine the elbow towards us or elbow away from us, and the end effector is at the same point. But there is no workspace where it can achieve any position and orientation of the end effector. The end effector in this case is always pointing down. Okay, if the robot wants to move its end effector coming out of the screen, it cannot, because it has only 4 degrees of freedom, and it is restricted by this limitation that in a 3D world, to describe the pose, we need at least 6 values, 3 for position and 3 for orientation, and this robot has only 4 degrees of freedom, so it cannot achieve any arbitrary combination of those 6 possible values. It will achieve some pose. Okay, its end effector will be at some place where it has a pose, but any arbitrary pose is beyond its scope. It cannot reach any arbitrary pose. Okay, so it has limitations. But as you can see, this is an industrial robot, and they are used quite a lot in industry. Even with fewer than 6 degrees of freedom, the robots are very common. Okay, for the 6 degree of freedom case, our robot will have exactly 6 degrees of freedom. Again, we are going to quickly look at the model of a Puma robot. This is a Puma robot. This is very commonly used, very popular, one of the most popular for a long period of time in industry. And this robot has exactly 6 degrees of freedom. Okay, you can see different degrees of freedom that it has. This is a joint axis. The first one was a joint axis as well. And this is another joint axis. So it has exactly 6 degrees of freedom. It can rotate around this joint as well. This is the 6th degree of freedom. There is some workspace where it can actually place the end effector in any position and orientation. Okay. And that workspace is finite. It obviously cannot reach infinitely far away from, for example, and that workspace might have an interesting shape, but it exists and it has some volume. And somewhere in this workspace, this robot might actually be able to achieve the same position and orientation in multiple ways. That means it has multiple solutions to inverse kinematics problem. And let's say there is a specific position orientation that I want, and the robot might be able to achieve it either with elbow pointing up or elbow pointing down. So there will be a finite number of ways in which it will be able to achieve any position and orientation. And because 6 degrees of freedom is the minimum number, that gives us some workspace where we can achieve any position and orientation. Okay, if we want to have more joints, then we'll have what is called a redundant robot. Okay, well, we can think of some examples of redundant robots. Let's think of a human arm. Okay, so we are not going to talk about robot arm. Let's think about the human arm. If you think about it, it has 7 degrees of freedom. Let's count at the shoulder. Okay, in my shoulder I have 3 axes of rotation. I can rotate my arm at the joint in 3 different ways, around 3 different axes. So my shoulder joint is a 3-axis joint, so it has 3 degrees of freedom at the shoulder. Then I have 2 degrees of freedom at the elbow. Okay, one, I can bend my arm and open my arm, and then I can rotate. Okay, so there are 2 degrees of freedom at the elbow, and then 2 degrees of freedom at the wrist. I can bend my wrist towards me or away from me, and then I can move my wrist side to side. Okay, so 2 degrees of freedom for the wrist, 2 degrees of freedom for the elbow, and 3 degrees of freedom for the arm. Okay, so I have 7 degrees of freedom in my arm, which means that there is some workspace where I can actually achieve any position and orientation, and I can achieve it in infinitely many ways. Okay, this summary table shows me that if a robot arm has more than 6 degrees of freedom, then there would be some space where the number of inverse kinematic solution would be infinite. So my human arm is a redundant robot. It has 7 degrees of freedom, so there would be some place where we can achieve our end effector pose, the pose of the hand, for example, in multiple ways, in fact in infinite ways. Okay, just think about it. If you place your hand on the table, okay, that the pose is already fixed. Now we can move our elbow up and down and the arm moves with it, but the pose of the hand is stationary. It does not change. The pose of the hand does not change. I've placed my hand on the table and I can move my arm. I have a continuous set of angles, which means an infinite workspace, infinite solutions, where I can have the exact same pose. Okay, my hand is fixed to the table, it's not moving. That means the pose is fixed, but I'm moving my elbow. This means there is a infinite ways in which I can achieve this particular pose. Okay, are there robot arms with more than 6 degrees of freedom? Yes. Not surprisingly, they are used a lot in research. Not as much as industry, where 6 degrees of freedom is much more common. In industry, as we have seen in our examples that we started with, we can control the environment. So we have the robot moving things around. We can take the obstacles away. We can design our environment such that the robot doesn't have to reach around obstacles, over or under things. Where we have a really complicated environment, where we might have to avoid obstacles, then people will use a robot with more than 6 degrees of freedom, even in industry. But because we are controlling the environment, 6 degrees of freedom is much more common. Remember that any degree of freedom, any additional degree of freedom costs money. A robot with 7 degrees of freedom will be more expensive than a robot with 6 degrees of freedom. And are there robots with 8, 9, 10 or multiple degrees of freedom? Robot arms actually, in most cases, it stops at 7. We don't have robot arms with more than 7 degrees of freedom. When people build redundant robot arms, they need one more than 6 at least. So they build it with 7. There are of course examples of prototypes, especially research results with robots with more than 7 degrees of freedom. In nature, if you think about, let's say, an elephant trunk or the body of a snake, those can be modeled as having a lot of more degrees of freedom than 7, and very, very versatile. But again, robots manufactured in large numbers, you will have 7 degrees of freedom if they are to be redundant, 6 degrees of freedom in many cases, and less than 6 for specialized robots like the SCARA robot doing a pick and place job. Okay, so let's recap. So let's recap our inverse kinematics lecture. Inverse kinematics is essentially the task where we are given a desired transform from the base to the end effector, and we have to come up with the values of all the joint angles, QIs. The way to do it, at least for analytical inverse kinematics, we compute first the forward kinematics, and then we just invert it to get inverse kinematics. And we get an analytical formula for our inverse kinematics. And this usually involves trigonometric tricks using different identities. It is always good to remember the formulas for sine and cosines of sums and differences. For example, sine squared plus cos squared is equal to 1. We have to remember this identity. We will do a couple of more examples where we will use these little tricks again and again. But then what we end up seeing, for example, we did a little example of a planar 2-link robot, which had 2 links, with the first link being a little longer than the second link. And we saw that the robot has a workspace that is shaped like a donut. Anything outside the outer circle, the robot cannot reach in any way. Anything right on the boundary, the robot can reach in just one way, which is with the arm fully stretched out. Anything inside the circle, the robot can reach in 2 ways, elbow up and elbow down. But then there is also an inner circle. Anything on the boundary of the inner circle, the robot could reach it in just one way, which is completely bent back on itself. Anything inside the inner circle, the robot cannot reach at all. So the number of solutions for inverse kinematics, we have 0 solutions outside, 1 solution right on the boundary, 2 solutions inside, and 1 solution on the inner boundary of the workspace, and then again 0 solutions inside this inner circle, which means that this is beyond the workspace of the robot. And this is something we will see very, very often, where the number of solutions for inverse kinematics varies depending on where we are in space. And then we talked about how the number of degrees of freedom of a robot relates to the number of solutions for inverse kinematics. Number of degrees of freedom relates to the number of inverse kinematic solutions for a robot. In 2D space, position and orientation are specified using 3 variables. So a robot will need at least 3 degrees of freedom such that it can achieve any position and orientation in some workspace. In 3D space, the robot is going to need at least 6 degrees of freedom, because we need 6 numbers to specify position and orientation of the end effector for some workspace. If a robot has fewer than 6 degrees of freedom, then it is restricted in terms of what it can do. If it has exactly 6 degrees of freedom, then it will have some workspace where it can reach any position and orientation in a finite number of ways. If it has more than 6 degrees of freedom, then it is a redundant robot, and there will be some part of the workspace where the robot can achieve any pose for the end effector in infinitely many ways. A good example of a redundant arm with 7 degrees of freedom is a human arm. Okay, so this brings us to the end of our inverse kinematics lecture.